44 days ago, the Strait of Hormuz was open, free for all vessels to move in and out. Iran blocked it in retaliation to US and Israeli strikes on its soil. Both parties agreed to open the strait under a ceasefire agreement. And now the US president has himself declared a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. The military confrontation is looming over the crucial waterway. More about this in our next report. Take a look.
Please keep bombing. Do it.
بازی‌های بی‌ادبانه.
40 days of war, 4 days of ceasefire, and 21 days of marathon negotiations later, the US and Iran are back to square one. Both sides failed to breach the deadlock during talks in Islamabad. Now, US President Donald Trump has ordered fresh mobilization in the Hormuz Strait. In a post on his Truth Social account, Trump announced that the US Navy will impose a blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. This means US forces will block any and all ships that are trying to enter the crucial waterway. Trump also added that those ships who are paying a toll to Iran will not have safe passage in the high seas. Trump has vowed to force open the Strait of Hormuz. The American president says that any Iranian who attacks US ships will be blown to hell. This could reopen the gates of war that are so far being held by a fragile ceasefire. Trump has issued a warning to Iran. He says that US forces remain locked and loaded and will finish whatever is left of Iran. Trump is responding to a blockade with a blockade. This could send shockwaves through global oil markets due to the complete choking of the Strait of Hormuz. The US has previously used blockades against Venezuela and Cuba. The crown jewel of the US Navy, the USS Gerald R. Ford, is back in action. It has joined the USS Abraham Lincoln and the amphibious assault ship, the USS Tripoli. American forces are already stepping up operations to open the Strait of Hormuz. 2 American guided missile destroyers passed through the strait on Saturday. This was the first transit by American ships during the war and a challenge to Iran's control of the waterway. The Iranian side, however, said that the US warships were forced to escape after they issued a warning. Following the collapse of US-Iran talks in Pakistan, Israel's army chief, Eyal Zamir, has ordered heightened readiness. Israeli forces have been asked to identify fresh targets and prepare strike packages. Iran's nuclear enrichment and the Strait of Hormuz blockade remain the main sticking points. Both the US and Iran declared that no common ground had been reached during the talks in Islamabad. Is there more diplomacy to come? Will the diplomatic needle still move? Or will there be a full-blown war for the Strait of Hormuz? Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
And to find answers to some of these questions, joining us live from Washington, D.C. is Dr. Charles Kupchan. He's a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Dr. Kupchan, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. Now, there's a lot to unpack here, so let me start with this one. Do you find it at all surprising that the US and Iran couldn't find any middle ground in the talks in Islamabad?
I don't find it surprising. I think it's worrying. Had there been at least some movement, some sense that the sides were coming together, I think J.D. Vance and the Iranian delegation would have stayed and tried to continue talking. The fact that the talks ended early Sunday morning and everybody went home is worrying. It suggests frustration. It suggests that both sides saw no real chance of moving the ball forward. And so now we're back in a situation in which each side is threatening the other side. I don't think we're yet at the cusp of a return to full-scale war, but the announcement that the United States is going to blockade the Gulf and try to put additional pressure on the Iranian economy does suggest that we're moving back away from diplomacy toward coercion and the potential use of force.
Right. We hear you, Dr. Kapchan, and both sides have walked away blaming each other. But now, of course, the bigger question is what comes next? Are we likely to see another push for diplomacy, as Trump has very recently claimed that Iran has not even left the bargaining table and they are going to come back and agree to all the terms? But at the same time, as we're seeing the escalation that is happening already, and Trump is saying that he is going to effectively blockade the Strait of Hormuz, which was essentially opened before it even began Iran. How do you make sense of that?
Well, I do think there'll be more negotiations. If there was a sense that talking is useless, my guess is that we would already hear explosions in Tehran and that the war would have begun again. And as a consequence, I think we're going to see at least a pause on further military action while Trump tries to tighten the screws on the Iranian economy. The problem, though, that Donald Trump faces is that he can't really open up the strait if he's blockading it. There's a contradiction here. He desperately needs oil and gas and other products to be passing through that strait into the global economy. But you can't do that if the U.S. is blockading it. You can't do that unless you've cleared the mines that Iran has already put into the strait. You can't really do that in wartime because it's very dangerous for tankers to pass through the strait if the Iranians are going to fire at them, whether it's with a guided missile or whether a speedboat or a mine or a naval drone. And given the impact of this war on the global economy, I do think that Donald Trump is under a lot of political pressure to get that strait open. That says to me that we're going to see some more diplomacy and coercive bargaining before we see more war.
And you've raised a very important point there, Dr. Kapchan. Of course, this conflict has been marred by contradictions from the very beginning. And now, given the military buildup in the region, the string of threats, and also the lack of clearly defined cogent objectives from the very outset, do you think that escalation was perhaps always the more likely outcome here? Or was there perhaps an underlying strategy to use these talks and what Iran called maximalist demands to perhaps corner Tehran into rejecting the deal altogether? Do you think that was the plan all along?
No, I don't. I think that, like many wars, once you start it, you lose control of where it goes. I do think that Donald Trump believed that this was a war that would last less than a week, that the Iranian regime was weak, that Iran's proxies in the region had been significantly disarmed, and that if the U.S. and Israel hit hard, the Iranian regime killed the leadership, it would be only a matter of days before the Islamic Republic fell apart and the people took to the streets and you'd have regime change. And Donald Trump would go down in history as the president who had the guts to take down the Islamic regime. It hasn't turned out that way. This is a war that has to some extent blown up in Donald Trump's face. And now he's got the midterms looming in November. He's got the price of gasoline rising by the day. He's not in a good place here. And I think he's trying to escalate to de-escalate by blockading the strait. But, the longer that strait is closed, the more damage that will be done to the American economy and the global economy. And so, no, I do not believe that this is what Trump planned. I think it went in directions that he never foresaw.
Noted, Dr. Kapchan. Of course, the conflict has taken a momentum of its own that perhaps would not have been anticipated earlier. And now Trump says that the American Gulf allies have already started, assisting the U.S. in the Strait of Hormuz. And in fact, NATO also wants to help with the Hormuz Strait. Well, UK and other countries are also sending minesweepers. This is what Trump has claimed. How do you read into that?
Well, I think that those countries are doing what they should be doing, which is chipping in to clean up the conflict, to get the strait opened. There's going to have to be a massive reconstruction effort because there's been a lot of damage done to oil and gas facilities in Qatar, in Kuwait, in Saudi Arabia, in other countries in the region. So under the best of circumstances, it will take many months and perhaps even years to get those oil and gas installations up and running again. And so that effort will require the technical know-how as well as the military capabilities of allies. But I don't think you're going to see a serious escort mission, an effort by a multinational force to open the strait until there is a sense that the ceasefire is going to last. And that's simply because this strait is narrow, it's shallow, it's dangerous, and until the parties in question, both the shippers but also the warships, until they have a sense that there is a durable peace, I don't think you're going to see them sailing back and forth through the Strait of Hormuz.
Right, Dr. Kapchan, while the Strait of Hormuz is one sticking point, another is, of course, nuclear. And the US says that Iran's refusal to commit to never developing a nuclear weapon was a key obstacle in the talks. But Iran has long denied seeking one. And after these two wars in the span of one single year, do you think that the voices within Iran arguing for a nuclear deterrent may now feel vindicated and emboldened even?
Well, there's no question that Iran got attacked in part because it was getting close to having the capability to produce a nuclear weapon, but it didn't have a nuclear weapon. So one of the reasons that you're seeing military action against Iran, but not military action against North Korea, is that North Korea already has the bomb. So yes, there is a logic here that would give added incentive to Iranian officials to say, see, we really do need to get the bomb. We need to race to the bomb. We've got 1,000 pounds of highly enriched uranium. Let's rush to break out. But I do think that this is an issue that is a kind of make or break for both sides, because Donald Trump cannot walk away from this conflict with Iran holding that highly enriched uranium, with Iran continuing to enrich uranium. There needs to be a deal here that leads to, I think, a sense in Israel, the United States, elsewhere, that Iran cannot and will not produce a nuclear weapon. Given the statements that came out of the meeting in Pakistan, we're not even close, right? The Iranians are talking about reparations. They're talking about enrichment. They're talking about a whole agenda that bears no resemblance to the demands that J.D. Vance and Washington is making.
Right.
And that's why I think one can come away from these talks in Pakistan worried about the next steps.
Of course, and this has been a war of many unintended consequences, Dr. Kapchan, and Israel and Lebanon have also emerged as a growing flashpoint here. Do you think the collapse of the Islamabad talks, they could spill over into these negotiations as well and perhaps further complicate efforts to prevent a wider regional escalation?
Well, I think for now, Israel will continue to take strikes against Lebanon. Israel has said that they don't see the conversation that's taking place as including Lebanon. And now that those talks have broken down, in some ways there's even less pressure on Israel to hold back and to use diplomacy rather than force. That having been said, I think it's good news that Israel is prepared to open negotiations with the Lebanese government about the disarmament of Hezbollah. And number two, if we do get progress on the diplomacy, if we do see the United States and Iran finding common ground a week from now, 2 weeks from now, I do think that the United States, if it needs to, would put pressure on Israel to stop the bombing of Lebanon if it's necessary for a durable truce. We're not there yet, but if the diplomacy does pick up speed, I'm guessing that will be one sidebar of that negotiation.
Absolutely, Dr. Kapchan, you've raised some very pertinent questions, but of course we'll have to wait and see and how the situation develops from here. But for now, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your perspective with us.
Pleasure to be with you. Bye-bye.